Hello everyone, this is the digestive system draw along, and I'm going to try to keep these kind of short. I'm hoping, pardon me, I'm hoping for this and the respiratory system to be about 30 minutes each or less. We'll see how it goes. Once I get talking about anatomy, I know I go on quite a bit. We're going to start, and let me just get a body in here. I'm going to cheat and use my um, symmetry tool here in Photoshop. And let's see, I'll go about there. Pubic symphysis. So that's just about as basic as they come, huh? Let's do the symmetry off. And instead of we're gonna do a side view for the head here because we're gonna have to talk about that in with the digestive system. I got the smoothing on. There we go. Oh, you get the idea. Get a few of these lines out of here. Okay, so that'll be our really pretty rough and bad side view. But you know what? I'm just going to roll with it tonight. I'm not going to re-record this 15 times. Okay, so digestive system, right. Well, I'm just going to let's do just a real quick kind of overview of that digestive system. If we start here in the mouth, we have the oral cavity, which then kind of comes up here, and you have an area called the pharynx, and we'll go back and talk about each of these a little bit more. The pharynx coming down through the larynx into the esophagus, which then comes and turns into the stomach. Which then comes out into the small intestines, and they don't go back and forth like this. We'll look at it. We'll look at it a little bit more. The small intestines, which then come and attach to the large intestine, which goes up, comes down. It makes this great, we'll look at this in detail, it makes this great path through the body. There's our large intestine. So, let's see, let me lighten that a little bit. If we start up here at the very beginning of this system that we just kind of sketched in real quick. First part of the digestive system is obviously the oral cavity, where, oopsie, get another layer, where your food is chewed up, and the act of chewing is called mastication. And then the food is swallowed. It goes through this system. And this area, so we have the oral cavity here. Let's turn the smoothing off. And then this system up here is called the nasal pharynx. Nasopharynx. 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 And this is, we'll look at this when we get into the respiratory system. It's connected into your sinuses, the nasal cavity coming up here through your nose. and these are actually, it's actually one, it's opening, it's connected. See how big, if I got an eraser here. It's actually in the roof of the mouth. Roof of the mouth comes right in here. It's actually open. This is why when you get a really bad cold and you get all this sinus drainage and you get a really sore throat, it's because all this sinus gunk is draining down here from the nasopharynx into your throat. We'll put the smoothing back on. And let's see if we keep coming. So we come down here through the throat and we have this area called the larynx. And this is where your voice box is, the vocal cords. Oh, I can't have that. And then it keeps on traveling down. That right there, that's why I use the smoothing all the time. Way too much tea. Comes down to through the esophagus. And the esophagus is just a muscular tube, and it has these contractions called peristaltic contractions, which are just waves of contractions that ripple down through and push food down towards the stomach. So this is the esophagus. And then that comes down here, and you have a little muscular sphincter here, and then this comes into the stomach. So here's our stomach. And from the stomach, empties out into an area called the small intestines. And again, these don't just go back and forth like we looked at in this little drawing. I'm going to do it again right now. We're just going to kind of very make this really generic right now. And we'll go back and fix that. You get the idea. And the small intestines, and the small intestines connect to the large intestine, and the large intestine comes up, comes across, this goes behind, comes down, and then let me think, makes this kind of S shape. And we'll look at all that more in just one second. It makes this kind of S shape before becoming the rectum and leaving the body through the anus. So we can get that. There we go. Now, if we look at the intestines a little more close up, so if we have the, oops, see, we need a brush, not an eraser. We have the stomach, and there's a sphincter muscle here that your body controls as to how much food and when gets let out. There are 3 different parts of your small intestine. And the first part, I'm going to just draw them each in a different color. And what they do is they kind of snake and wrap around so the first part is called the duodenum. D-U-O, get rid of that again. D-U-O-D-E-N-U-M. I believe that's how it's spelled. The duodenum. The next part of that is going to be called, again it snakes around, the jejunum. And then the third part, I'll write that down in just a second. Where'd my other color go? The third part of that's going to be called the ilium. And again, this all, it kind of circles around and makes all these great overlaps, etc. And then this, alright, so the duodenum, this area is the jejunum, Jejunum, and the last part in the darker purple, this is the ilium, Ilium. And the way I had to remember that, and you guys don't need to remember this, but the way I had to remember that was that DJs have eyes. Duodenum, jejunum, ilium, DJI, which was, it's kind of silly, but it definitely worked for me. So you have the small intestine. When your food goes through the small intestine, it's taking a whole bunch of nutrients out of the food, and your food is becoming liquefied as it's mixing with gastric juices and passing all through your system, and nutrients are being pulled out. When it gets down here is where it attaches to the large intestine. And the large intestine, let's see, so it attaches here. We'll come back and look at that. The large intestine, it comes up, it turns and comes across, goes behind, and then it comes back down, and it makes this S shape before it comes back down again. So let's look at that in a little more detail. This area where the ilium meets the large intestine is called the cecum, where it just, let me get a darker color, it just kind of, merges into there. So all this liquid food is now coming into the large intestine. Coming off the large intestine, you also have this little thing called the appendix. And the appendix is, you often hear people getting inflamed appendix, appendectomy, they have to go in and remove it. It can get infected and enlarge and burst, and then you have fecal matter in your abdominal cavity, which is obviously never a good thing to have happen. They used to think it was kind of an organ that just a vestigial organ, like leftover as we've evolved, but more recently they found that it actually is it kind of houses a lot of good bacteria for the gut, and actually aids in digestion. So anyhow, appendix, very small thing, causes lots of problems. So here is our large intestine, and it goes up, which is called the ascending colon, and it takes a turn where it comes across, and where it goes across is called the transverse colon, and then it turns and it comes back down. And I don't know what it was. I went through a period of time where I swear I was just drawing the colon all the time. I don't know how many illustrations I did of the colon. It was just insane. And then it comes down. That's the ascending colon. This side, this is the descending, obviously. And then where it makes this S shape in here, this is the sigmoid colon. And again, you don't need to remember all these terms, okay? Just know that they exist, and then next time you have to study anatomy, it'll make more sense. So you've heard it once. Comes down to the rectum, And remember that rect, that means straight, like your rectus abdominis muscles. It's a straight section, so your rectum, and then exits through the anus. And what I think is really, really interesting about the digestive system is that you have this giant tube. You are a food tube. You have this tube that travels from your mouth all the way down to your bum, and your food is processed along the way, and that food never makes contact with anything except the lining of your digestive system. It's kind of fascinating. And so, speaking of that, when all this liquidy digested matter gets into the large intestine, that's when the water is pulled out of it. So at this point, when it gets here, it's still very liquidy. If you've ever had, this is gross, if you've ever had diarrhea, it's kind of that consistency because your body's trying to get gone real quick. When it goes through the large intestine, for whatever reason, it doesn't pull the liquid out. So this whole route, liquid is being pulled out, and your solid waste is being accumulated, and the stool is forming down in this area. So I know digestive system, it's kind of gross, but uh, it's highly necessary, obviously. So let's see, there's a couple other things I need to tell you about the digestive system before we move on. See if I'm going to hit I'm 15 minutes. I could hit my 30-minute limit here. Let's see if I can do it. The other thing I want to add in here is what are called some accessory organs. And we'll talk a little bit about, so there's a wall right here called the diaphragm, which we'll talk about when we get into the respiratory system. Sitting under the diaphragm is your liver. So your liver kind of fits in here. And other accessory organs, you have your spleen, which sits kind of back here. This is all behind, liver's in front of the stomach. Spleen is, let me make sure I get this right. The stomach tucks kind of right up under there. Spleen is behind the stomach. And then you have your pancreas, which also sits back here. It kind of touches the spleen, it comes down, and it's behind the stomach, so it's in this area. So here's your pancreas. So liver, spleen, pancreas, and let's see, then you also have a gallbladder, which is another part of, and I never have a green, do I? I'm always looking for a green. This'll do. Is your gallbladder, and the gallbladder is tucked up here under the liver. So the gallbladder's in here, and all these accessory organs, they regulate the digestion of fats. So the gallbladder gives off bile, which goes into the small intestine and helps break down fat. The pancreas helps with blood sugar. And the spleen and the liver both filter blood. So those are going to be your accessory organs of your digestive system. And is that all I wanted to tell you about that? It is, I think. So, get in your book, and when you do your sketches, and this is just basic, but really get in and look at the layout of the intestines, the small intestine, the large intestine, and kind of see how that goes together. They are challenged to draw, but like everything else in medical illustration, once you kind of accept that fact and just kind of roll with it, it can be a really fun challenge to kind of do what you got to do. And let's see. I hope some of you got an opportunity to look at this stuff at the cadaver lab today. And for those of you that didn't, oh my God, you're missing out on some cool stuff. And I'm going to quit sketching. Okay, that is it for the digestive system. And I will probably tag right on, well, we'll follow up with the respiratory system, which is going to hopefully be about this short. All right, thanks guys.